Well, everybody, I am more than excited today. We have somebody who is an inspiration to not only, people out there who are looking to become a professional wrestler, but just an inspiration to anybody. We have none other than the handicap hero, Gregory Iron. Gregory, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on the show, man. Appreciate it.
So I'm going to just get right into it. You had what I would call major obstacles at a very early age. Where others may have probably given up, what kept you ultimately dreaming that you wanted to become a professional wrestler?
Well, I was born with cerebral palsy, which basically is a disability that affects primarily the right side of my body. It varies in most people, but for me it's most noticeable in my right hand and arm. And growing up, before I entered school, I didn't really think I was very much different than anybody else. Once I started to get around kids more, that's when I started to realize, I guess I am a little different. Because, I liked all the same things that I thought kids liked, like Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers and, playing with toys. And I didn't see myself as any different than anyone. And, once you enter school and you're around kids all the time and the bullying begins, then you get to see that, I guess, everyone's different and not everybody accepts people for their differences, especially when they don't understand them. So you combine that with, my home life that I had, which, I grew up with a very abusive physically and mentally mom, and sometimes my dad wasn't the best either. My mom was very heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol, and so, being around that type of stuff all the time, it gives you a very negative vibe, a very negative energy, and it could easily pull a kid down, and they could use that as an excuse for the rest of their life to go down the wrong path. Luckily for me, I had things to focus my time and energy on, like I enjoyed writing and drawing, but the one thing that was the most powerful motivator for me, more than anything, was professional wrestling. And it was something that I found as an escape. If things were going bad at home, if we were being evicted, if kids were bullying me at school, I could turn to professional wrestling on Monday night or Saturday morning or Sunday morning or pop in a VHS tape. And I could forget about all my problems and I can get lost in these larger-than-life superheroes for me. Some kids have Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, and obviously I was into all those things too, but for me there was no greater superheroes than the guys that I saw on WWF television, like Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and Macho Man Randy Savage and Jake the Snake Roberts. Like, those guys were my heroes, and they were my inspirations to kind of make me keep going and sort of see that, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and you can overcome odds if you work hard and you stay dedicated to the things that you truly care about.
Okay. Now, at what age did you decide, this is it, professional wrestling is what I'm going to do?
It was one of those things where I just kept getting more and more obsessed with wrestling. Like, it was something that, when I was in elementary school and middle school, it was kind of one of those things that I think my parents thought, and I also kind of subconsciously thought was, I would just grow out of this at some point. And it wasn't something that I was trying to do or something, but I just thought, at some point you just kind of, you grow out of wrestling. But I just kept getting deeper and deeper in it, and reading more magazines and watching more tapes and reading more in-depth wrestling websites and learning insider information. And I thought I was the smartest wrestling fan in the world, like every kid that goes online nowadays thinks. And I just kept getting deeper and deeper, and it got to the point where, because of my disability, I never really thought, hey, I could be a wrestler, but my friends kind of implanted in my mind, well, maybe you could do something else in wrestling. Maybe you could be a commentator, or maybe you could be a writer, because we were figuring out that people wrote scripts for wrestling and stuff. And so I started gearing my energy towards things like that. And, I was studying tape and commentary and just trying to soak up all the information I could. For some reason, I had the thought process that guys like Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone literally memorized all of the information that they were spewing out on Monday nights. And so I thought, like, okay, like I got to memorize who won every Royal Rumble, and I got to memorize the whole card of WrestleMania 17 and blah, 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 like crazy stuff like that. So whereas now today, like I'm, almost a walking encyclopedia of useless wrestling knowledge from 10 and 20 years ago. So because of that drive that I had to somehow be a part of wrestling. But when I was about 16, I saw Zach Gowen on TV, on SmackDown, and obviously, Zach wrestled with one leg. And when I saw that, I think it was the first time that I kind of stopped and went, holy crap, like maybe this is possible. And it wasn't that much longer after that I started lifting weights. And, again, I wasn't really thinking, okay, I'm going to be a wrestler. I started lifting weights, and I got a bench because I asked my dad, because secretly I wanted to try to get the attention of girls. It wasn't because I was like, now I'm going to be a wrestler. But it was subconsciously in the back of my mind somewhere because I saw Zach, and I kept lifting weights more and more often. And it eventually got to the point where I was going to WWE shows, and I started going to independent events, and it would start out where I was just having a good time and enjoying myself, but then there would always come this point, like halfway through the show, where I almost got like depressed feeling, like watching these guys in the ring, and I don't know what show it was, but it just came over me all of a sudden. I thought to myself, like, I really want to be in there. Like, I wish that was me. I want to do that, and so like those were like some of the first moments where I was like, maybe I should try to be a wrestler. So when I started going to independent shows in 2005, I was about 18 years old. I started going to Cleveland All Pro Wrestling, which was within 10 minutes of my house. And the first show I ever saw was main evented by Buff Bagwell and Chris Hamrick. JT Lightning was promoter. I talked to JT Lightning. I basically shared my story. We had actually talked on the phone a year earlier, about me training to be a wrestler, and again, I didn't think it was possible. I was asking him, how do you be a manager? How do you be a referee? Like, I'd like to train for that. I don't think I could do it. And he was actually the first person that kind of encouraged me to, like, just come into school and try. And it still took me a year to get there because I was so afraid that I was going to try to do something that I love so much and fail. And I was worried that, what if I fail at this and I think of wrestling differently? Like, what if I hate wrestling? And I didn't want to hate wrestling. So it's just all of these feelings and emotions that, you're feeling when you care about something so much, and especially when you're a teenager and you're growing up and you're trying to figure out who you are and what you're going to become. Like, there were a lot of crazy emotions going through within my brain at 18 years old. And, when I first started training in 2006, it was scary. But doing that tryout and getting my ass kicked was the first steps, and it hurt. But I kept going back because I wanted to get better, and I wanted to succeed. And to be quite honest, because of high school and the way kids treated me and the way my parents treated me sometimes and told me, I wouldn't be able to do any of the dreams I wanted to do, I had a chip on my shoulder, and I wanted to prove people wrong. And to take those first steps into professional wrestling, like that was my way to prove people wrong. So I guess to answer your question, it was a very, very, very long process to finally figure out, like, I'm going to get in professional wrestling business, because I didn't know how to get into business, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. I never thought I'd be a wrestler. I never thought that right now we'd be talking on the phone, and I'd be telling you 8 years after I started training in 2006, like, hey, I'm a kind of successful professional wrestler, but here we are.
Well, it's, once again, like I said, it's an inspiring story, and I guess for me, it's one of the questions I wanted to ask was, how were you received in the locker room during your, the early stages of your career? So you said that you were wrestling in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And you kind of knew some of the people who you were wrestling with. Did anybody try to, in the locker room talk you out of it, or were they, was anybody not open to the idea of you wrestling?
When I first started training, I distinctly remember JT Lightning always saying to me when he would teach me basic things like how to tie up or how to do a drop down or a shoulder tackle or a couple of chain wrestling type maneuvers, he would always say to me, this is a basic of professional wrestling, and if you can't do this, I can't continue training you. And that always scared the crap out of me, because I was afraid that, like, man, if I can't do this one simple little thing, JT's going to stop training me. And I didn't want that to happen. So if we did something basic and I couldn't figure out how to do it the conventional way, I'd find a different way to do it, because I didn't want to be told I can't train anymore, because that was going to be failure, and I didn't want to fail. As far as when I would start wrestling on shows, which I thought was entirely too soon in retrospect now, at the time, it was 3 months after I started training, and mostly because JT wanted to sell tickets, he started throwing me on shows, and obviously I was excited, but I didn't know any better. Looking back at it, I wish I would have got like a year or two more of training before I got thrown out there. But when I was in the locker room, I was just a shy, quiet kid. But when I warmed up I was cocky, and I had that chip on my shoulder, and I talked a lot of trash, and I got on the wrong side of a lot of people. And it took a couple months for a guy by the name of Josh Prohibition to kind of pull me aside and tell me, hey, man, a lot of people don't like you. And if you keep acting the way you're acting, you're going to get blackballed from doing anything in wrestling before you even get anywhere. You need to stop telling people what you can do, and you need to show them what you can do. And I think that was the first wake-up call that I really had, because I respected Josh Prohibition so much. He was one of the first indie guys I looked up to. Him and M-Dog, Matt Cross, like I saw them on the Backyard Wrestling video game, found out they were from Cleveland, so like those guys were like huge role models for me and idols. And so like to have Josh pull me aside and basically say, hey, you're an asshole, that was kind of a wake-up call. And from there on out, like, I started shutting up and doing what I had to do to show people, even if I have this disability, even if I'm 5'4", I'm going to be a good wrestler. I'm not going to have to tell you. I'm going to show you.
Now, you kind of touched on this, but because of your disability, did you find it harder to have people that wanted to work with you in the ring? Were people like shying away from that, or were people just, accepting of it?
I think for the most part, people were accepting of it. I think the only problems that I've really come across over the years is when guys, if anything, they're almost afraid to be a bad guy against me and make fun of me because of my disability. Like, they always kind of pull me inside and go, hey, is it okay if, I poke fun at your hand a little bit? And I'm so open to it, because I'm like the ultimate underdog, and being a guy with a disability, that's the ultimate dick move to do, to be a bad guy and make fun of something like that, something that's beyond a person's control. So I'm always all for it. And I always I could see why people ask me, but then I always think to myself, like, why is that even a question? Like, of course you can make fun of it. That's why it's here. You know what I mean? Like, if you didn't acknowledge it, what else do I have?
Yeah.
I mean, not to take away from my athletic ability, because I think I'm okay, and I think I'm okay at storytelling, and I've got some cool things that I do. But for the most part, like, the big story is the disability. And if you ignore something that I think to most fans, like, is obvious and is right there, you're kind of selling yourself short, and you're selling the story short.
Okay, now it's 2014. You mentioned you've been in the business now for about 8 years. Can you give me your highest and lowest point that you've achieved so far in professional wrestling?
Wow. Well, I've had a lot of high points, and I'm very fortunate for that. I'm grateful now at this point that I can make decent money in wrestling. It took me, 5 or 6 years before I was able to do that. And not a lot of guys can make decent money on the independent level. And especially, I'm not a guy who's with some of the bigger companies like Dragon Gate or Ring of Honor, or I'm not even with Chikara anymore. But I've somehow been able to carve out a niche for myself where I'm getting constant work, and I'm teaming with a guy like Zach Allen that, 10 years ago I looked up to and never even imagined that I would share the same ring with him. So it's like, it's awesome that I get to make money professional wrestling. And, obviously the thing I did with CM Punk and Cole Cabana back in 2011, like, that really pulled my story out and into the mainstream and really brought my story to the forefront. And, that got me in Sports Illustrated and on ESPN.com and on Fox News in New York. So, like, that was crazy. I've had great matches with great guys like M-Dog that, again, I looked up to before I got into wrestling. Johnny Gargano, who helped train me. And, I look up to you so much and has become one of my best friends. And, I've got to wrestle guys like Greg the Hammer Valentine and Tracy Smothers. And I've wrestled Zach Gallen one-on-one. And there's just, there's so many guys. Rhino, there's so many guys that I would have never in a million years thought, like, hey, I not only will I wrestle these guys one day, I'll be able to hang with them. And I've been able to say that I could do that despite my affliction, despite the thing that everyone said was going to stop me from living my dream. So I guess that to me is a high point. As far as low point, I mean, I've honestly never stopped to think of the lowest point in my wrestling career, but I mean, there was a lot of sacrificing in those first years. It's ironic. I think like the lowest point for me was probably right before the CM Punk thing happened, because like it was almost one of those situations where you're at the fork in the road, and I had been working a real job and wrestling for 5 straight years. The first time I ever got paid for wrestling was 8 months after I started wrestling, and it was in Pittsburgh, 3 hours away from home, and I got paid $5. And I was so happy to make $5. But it started getting to a point with 5 years later where, $5 paydays and $20 paydays and the occasional big $40 or $50 payday and no gas money, it wasn't cutting it. Mm-hmm. And it was, and I just lost my job in real life. So right before the CM Punk thing, that was in July of 2011. May of 2011, I have no job, and I'm still wrestling every weekend for no money. And I'm trying to figure out, man, what do I do? Like, I only did like half a year of college to go try to be a wrestler because I didn't want to live in regret. And I was doing it, but I wasn't making the money at it. So it's like, it was one of those situations like, geez, like, what's my next move? And I almost canceled that booking in Chicago where the thing with Punk Cabana happened. And it's just crazy to think about because I didn't have money to get there. And my brother gave me $50 to get to Chicago. And if he wouldn't have did that, I might have canceled that booking, and the thing with CM Punk might have never happened. I mean, that wasn't something I was told about. It was something that, was planned a couple days in advance, and it was going to be a surprise. So I would have canceled, the biggest life-changing moment of my life, So it's like, that was probably my lowest point, having no job, no money, still wrestling for no money, and wondering what to do next. But, you have to take those situations and you got to fight through them. You got to keep going, especially, like I said, if you love something and you're passionate about it, eventually that passion shows through. And someone's going to see it, someone's going to acknowledge you for it, and then everything changes.
Okay. And for anyone who's listening that doesn't actually know what Greg's talking about, you were at a show in Chicago, and you were Colt Cabana was also on the show, and
yeah.
After a match, this was also when CM Punk was still with the WWE, and he came out to, and I don't know exactly how many people were there, but it was I would assume a typical independent show.
Sure, yeah, a couple hundred people were there.
And, to have somebody of that caliber to come out, and basically he just gushed over how great Gregory is, and, I'm telling the story for you. I don't know why, but but yeah, you can take it from there.
Yeah, it was one of those situations where I had been wrestling for AAW in Chicago for a couple years, just doing dark matches. I'd never even been on the main show, and then all of a sudden, about a week before the show, I started getting text messages from a guy by the name of Ricky Shane Page, who wrestles out of Ohio, and he texted me saying, "Hey, Danny, the promoter, wants to make sure you're on the show this week," and blah, blah, blah. And again, I was contemplating canceling, and I was like, yeah, I'll be there. And then he said, like, you're teaming with Colt Cabana. And Colt was a guy that I'd gone to for the last few years for advice, just writing him online and talking to him at shows, trying to figure out, what do I do to be successful as a wrestler. So I didn't want to miss that opportunity to team with Colt. So I was like, man, I really want that to happen. And then I find out we're randomly teaming against the tag team champions on the main show. So it felt like a weird situation in general because it was like I've never even wrestled on the main show, and now I'm on the main show and I'm teaming with Colt. So like, what the heck's going on here? So that's when I went to my brother and I was like, hey man, like I got this good opportunity coming up in Chicago. teaming with this Colt Cabana guy. It's kind of a big deal. Would you be able to loan me just $50 to get to Chicago? Because I was getting paid some money, but it wasn't enough. I didn't have anything to get there, so he gave me $50, and I drove to Chicago. And when I got there, walked in the building, got my gear, was gonna warm up in the ring a little bit, and I see CM Punk, and I'm like, holy crap, because this was the same week that the Money in the Bank thing just went down. Mm-hmm. He won the belt, he left the company. And I see Punk standing there, and I'm like, oh, God, what do I do? I had the freak out moment because, CM Punk is awesome, and he's the WWE champion, and, all that good stuff. So it's kind of I walked up to him nonchalantly, and I just go, hi, I'm Greg, nice to meet you. And he kind of smirks at me, and he just goes, hi. And I remember distinctly walking away and walking back to Ricky, who I drove with, and this kid, Eric Ryan, Bobby Beverly, and I go, the weirdest thing just happened. I said hi to CM Punk, and he said hi to me back, but it was almost like he knew who I was. And then so the whole night I was just thinking man, what should I say to him so I can get some advice from him, or I don't want to bug him and blah, blah, blah. So of course, I planned the match, me and Colt, and we have the whole thing we're going to do, and we do the match, and I know Punk's watching in the back, so I'm so nervous. And afterwards, Colt cuts his promo in the ring, and he puts me over, and if it would have ended there, it would have been great. And then Colt kind of put the mic down. He said, stay right here in the ring. And so then he grabs Punk, and Punk comes out. And, I think I'm just going to be in the background of this WWE storyline, because he's just done the thing at the Comic-Con the weekend before where he showed up, and that went viral on YouTube and stuff. So I was thinking, oh, man, this is going to go viral. And, I'm going to be seen in the background, and it's sweet. Maybe somebody will know who I am. That's great. And then he comes out, and he walks up to me before he even grabs the mic, and he shakes my hand, and he goes, you all right? And I shake my head, yeah. And he goes, you're fucking awesome. And then, instantly, I have this moment where I get, choked up, and I'm like, oh, God, that was crazy. I can't believe he said that to me. And, but he didn't say it to a live crowd, so it was one of those things where it's man, yeah, he didn't say it to everybody, but I can always know that CM Punk told me I was awesome. Man, that's a cool thing. And then he grabs the mic, and he goes, pardon my language, but you're fucking awesome. And so then I'm like, oh, wait, he just said that on the mic now. Okay. And then, I couldn't even contain myself, and I started crying because, I always feel like a pansy about it, because I just started, crying in the ring, but, I don't know. At that moment, everything he was saying and everything that was happening just became so surreal. It was so dreamlike because, A, I didn't expect that, and B, it's just none of it made sense. I was teaming with Colt Cabana, a guy that I loved, and the WWE champion's in the ring, and he's saying all these nice things about me, and it felt like a dream, but it was real. So it was one of those things where it's I had this overwhelming feeling of this was my moment. I didn't know if it was going to be the top moment in my life, if I was ever going to go higher, but it was this realization that wow, everything I've ever gone through, everything that I've ever struggled for, everything that I've ever worked hard for, it's coming to a head right now. I'm finally getting that acknowledgement that that, and that feeling that it was all worth it. And then I get hoisted on their shoulders and carried around the ring, and the crowd's chanting my name, and it's just it's crazy. It's I think if, obviously the goal for any wrestler is to make a bunch of money and get signed to a contract and go to WWE, and I'd love to do all those things, but I don't know if, even if I went to WWE, if I can get a moment any greater than that moment I had in Chicago, because it was so real and so genuine. So when I started crying, that was tears of joy, tears of the realization that if you work hard, good things are possible, dreams come true. And it sounds so cliche, but I'm only one person, and I'm the only person that's ever going to have that moment. But it was so cool to be able to share that moment with those people in Chicago, and then for it to go viral online, and to put my story out there, and to be able to help people on a wider level, talking to people with disabilities on Facebook and Twitter, and or people that know people with disabilities, or people that struggle with drug addiction that know my mom's story. And it's just an incredible blessing. And, I appreciate it every single day.
I mean, once again, and most of this is I've seen the video on YouTube and all kinds of places, so you should definitely check it out if you haven't seen it, because it's just, it's one of the most real, I guess, real emotional moments that I've ever seen. And I'm like you, I've watched professional wrestling forever. So,
Sure.
now we're going to get into real quick the formation of the Handicap Heroes with you and Zach Gowen. You guys teamed up and you take on pretty much anybody and everybody out there today. Earlier, when I spoke with Zach, I asked him this question, and I want to see if you guys match. So
Okay.
I said, who is your dream tag team opponents?
Oh God. Currently wrestling or just in general?
Just in general.
Holy crap. Wow. I mean, if I could like go back like in time and like in their prime, I don't know, I would pick someone ridiculous like the Rockers or the Legion of Doom or man, like just I think currently it would be the Hardy Boys. Like if we could do the Handicap Heroes versus the Hardy Boys, like that would be insane. We've actually got to know Matt really well and Jeff a little bit over the past couple of years, and they've been so cool and so helpful in helping spread the word of the Handicap Heroes and what we're trying to do. So I think if I were to pick like a current team that's active and a team of guys that like I thought were awesome as a teenager and still think are incredible today, it would be the Handicap Heroes versus the Hardy Boys for sure.
Okay, now you guys were pretty close on that, but he said the Young Bucks.
Young Bucks would be great too, man. I love those guys. Like, you know what? I think me and Zach are the Handicap Young Bucks. I'm just saying.
No, I think that that's a match that should definitely happen. And I don't know anybody who's listening, FWE, House of Hardcore, Northeast Wrestling, any of our promotions here in the Northeast that want to do that, you should do it just for me and for these guys.
Yeah, and you know what? Zach Allen has a heck of a super kick. You got to see it.
And he was dropping some really, really awesome puns earlier, so
I'm sure he was.
He'll appreciate that. Now WWE has their own anti-bullying campaign called Be a Star. It's been noted that you were a victim of bullying yourself.
Sure.
What advice would you give someone who may be suffering from bullying today, or was in similar situations as you?
Man, you know what? The difference between when I was coming up and today with bullying is, when I was a kid, I get bullied at school. I get bullied when I was out in public. But then I could go home and the bullying would stop. I didn't really, the internet was still in its infancy. I didn't really have a computer. I definitely didn't have a cell phone. And we didn't have cell phones with internet. So the things with kids now is, you can go home, but the bullying doesn't end. It keeps happening on Facebook and Twitter and via, phone calls and text messages and the internet in general. And it's just, sometimes it seems like there's no escape, but like for any kid out there who's currently getting bullied, all I could say is you've got to realize that eventually it ends. And whatever your situation is now, it eventually gets better. You just got to wait. And sometimes the waiting's the hardest part. But, I wasn't the coolest kid in school. And I don't think I'm still the coolest adult, to be quite honest. But I think that, like, I always have these moments where I've done so much more than I ever thought I could do. Like, I tricked myself into being successful almost. Because, like, I started out as this, like, cocky punk kid with a chip on my shoulder because everybody made fun of me. So it was like I was out to prove the world wrong. And, I would tell people, like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be successful. I'm not a dork, and I'm not a loser, and I'm not just some dumb cripple, and I'm going to live my dream, and I'm going to do everything that you say I can't do. And somewhere along the way, when that stuff started happening, because of how driven I was and how hard I was working and how I stopped paying attention to the critics and the bullies, and it started happening, it was almost like, oh, crap, like, I'm actually doing this. And it's almost like, you kind of have those moments every now and then where you're like, man, like, I didn't even think this was possible. And so for any kid that like is going through problems right now, you have to understand that you're not always going to be in the same exact situation that you're in right now. Things change, people change, and you grow up. You're not always going to have those pimples on your face, and you're not going to always going to have to wear a pair of glasses. You'll be able to get contacts, and you're not always going to wear the worst clothes. Like, you can get better clothes, and at the end of the day, if some of that stuff doesn't change, it doesn't matter. You have to learn to love and accept who you are. People come up to me all the time, and especially like religious folk, and they'll always say to me, like, if I could somehow change your hand for you and like make it better, like I would. And I always say to them, I wouldn't want you to change it. I wanted so desperately not to have this messed up arm when I was a kid. But as I got older and I got to understand like the importance of my disability and like what I could do with it and how I could share my story with people and motivate people and how it essentially helped me become a wrestler, I wouldn't change this disability ever. And I'm so grateful that there was nothing that could be done to fix my disability, because I went to the doctors and I tried to figure out, surgeries and things of that nature to get it changed, and there's nothing that could be done. And I'm so glad that it can be fixed. And I wouldn't fix it for anything in the world. You have to be happy with who you are, because you're the only you. You're never going to completely change. You're the same heart, you're the same soul, and you're always going to be that same soul. So you have to grow to love that part of you and embrace it and make the best of it.
Okay. Once again, I hope that anybody who's listening can, get online and look up some more about Gregory Iron and Zach Gowen, both for that matter, because they're truly inspirational people.
Lightning round.
You are inspiration to many people. Who is your biggest inspiration?
Right now, it would have to be, there's two people. There's Zach Gowen, and then I legitimately mean that, even though we poke fun at each other, Zach Gowen, and I have a beautiful girlfriend, Mary, and she's very positive and supportive in everything I do, and, I couldn't ask for a better person in my life.
Okay. When life hands you lemons, you...
make lemonade, or... I don't know, put it in my water and not make lemonade, because that's not enough for just lemonade.
Who is your favorite wrestler of all time?
Hulk Hogan.
Okay.
That's who I grew up with, the Hulkster.
Okay. Now, this kind of goes back to something I heard about whenever you were trying to come up with a wrestling name. So what are your thoughts on Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man?
Oh, he's good as Iron Man. I suck as Iron Man. I'm glad I was an Iron Man, because that's a terrible name for a wrestler. Because there's only one Iron Man, and that's the Iron Man. And Robert Downey Jr. did a heck of a job.
Okay, and lastly, your dream opponent.
Shawn Michaels. Let's bring Shawn Michaels out of retirement, because I don't know, like he's the one guy that, if we're talking any era, I feel like he could bring the best out of anybody. And Shawn Michaels is one of those guys that I don't care how far wrestling goes, Shawn Michaels will always be someone that guys can look back on and go, like, man, that guy could do it all. Whether it's like as far as like, lucha libre or just high flying technical stuff, like, and just the little things he does. Like, I can't be a Shawn Michaels because of my disability, but there's so many little things that he does in the ring as far as transitions and the way he tells a story that I can learn from, and a lot of young wrestlers can learn from, just by watching and paying attention to his matches, and to be able to work with a guy like that, man, that would be the coolest thing possible. So Shawn Michaels.
Lightning round.
Where can you be found on like social media? Do you have Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Gregory Iron. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Handicapped Hero. I'm on Instagram at Gregory_Iron. And if you can't remember all that stuff, you can go to my official website, which is gregory-iron.com.
And you can also find not only our wrestling tees at Pro Wrestling Tees, but Gregory Irons as well, correct?
That's right, ProWrestlingTees.com/Gregory Iron.
All right. Well, we thank you very much. We hope that you have continued success. You and Zach both. You're both great guys.
Good, man. Thanks for having me on the show, and I hope I didn't ramble too much.
Wow, Gregory Iron. I want to thank him again very much for coming on the show. Truly an inspiration, and I see a lot of big things happening for this guy in the future. He seems to be just in a great place in life. He hasn't let his handicap define who he is. He's using it to his advantage, and I wish nothing but the best for this guy.
That's right. But speaking of handicap heroes, joining us right now is the other half of the handicap heroes. That's Zach Gowen.
Zach, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks very much. I put the leg in legend.
Yes.
And my career path, I wouldn't recommend to any aspiring wrestler my career path, which was I hit its peak 6 months in, and then I burned it to the absolute ground about 5 years in, and then I've been crawling and fighting ever since. But I'm happy to say that I'm at a place of peace, and I've never been happier where I'm at now. So it's nice to talk with you, and thank you for the interest in my story.
No, absolutely. Now, for anybody out there that doesn't know, I'm going to just briefly tell everybody that Zach Gowen, at a very early age, it was 8 years of age, if I do say so, you were diagnosed with cancer, and they had to amputate your leg.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So the wrestling business is hard enough to get into, if you have no obstacles, but you had a ton. So what kept you going when, other people would have just stopped?
Well, it was my love for professional wrestling and what it meant to me as a child growing up. See, wrestling provided a much-needed escape growing up, and you touched on one part of my childhood. I didn't have the best upbringing in the world. Obviously, losing a leg to cancer will do that. But also not. My dad took off. When I was 4 years old, and I grew up just kind of feeling left out and not feeling like I quite fit in anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those feelings just left when I would watch wrestling. And so it's something that I have a deep-seated love and respect for. And that, as most people or most guys, when they grow up, like their love of wrestling kind of goes away with their age as they grow up. But for me, it just intensified. So when there was an opportunity to actually get in the ring, I hopped at that chance because, and it was the stars and planets all lined up because I was the right size. I was athletic, and I had a drive and determination to be good, plus my love of wrestling too. So it all came together. If any of those one elements weren't there when I started out, I wouldn't be talking to you now. So that makes me very, very appreciative of the business for sure.
Absolutely. Now, at what age did you decide that you were going to be a pro wrestler?
I decided at the age of 16 I was going to be a professional wrestler, and I told everybody who would within earshot that when I grow up I'm going to be a professional wrestler, and most people nodded politely and patted me on the head and said, "Oh, that's good for you, Zach. It's always important to have dreams to work towards." But nobody really believed that I could do it except for me. And so that was at 16, and at 18, right after I graduated high school that summer, I started training.
Okay. Now, after setting your mind to becoming a pro wrestler, were you met with opposition from your family or friends? You kind of touched on it, but did you have some people that were really behind you?
Not really. I didn't care. Nobody was behind me, and nobody was against me either.
Yeah.
It was just something that I did, and I had tunnel vision for. And it didn't matter to me what anybody else thought about what I was doing because the first time I stepped foot into a wrestling ring, and I'm throwing so many bad puns at you, but the first time I set foot in a wrestling ring, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be at that moment for the first time in my life, and there was a certain magic that kind of went in and through me, and since then I've been pursuing that. I've never felt that strongly about anything in my life up until that point, you know. So of course I went at it with all the vigor one would think.
Okay. Now, how were you received in the locker room when you first started your career as a pro wrestler?
It was fine. It was so different for me because I was doing these BS. I'm not sure if we can swear on this or not, I was doing these.
Yeah, you can do whatever you'd like.
Oh, cool, man. I was doing these bullshit little indie shows in front of literally they're like half backyard, half legitimate wrestling shows in front of 20 or 30 people, you know. And so there was nobody taught me anything about a code of ethics or anything like that, because the people that I was rolling around with didn't have an understanding of how the business worked. And so when I was cherry picked by WWE less than a year into my career, it was a culture shock for me to be placed on that level, in that environment with these guys that do this for an actual living, and it's how they support themselves and their families, you know. So there's definitely a culture. I was fine on the indies because what I did really didn't have much of an impact. But once I got to WWE, and it was a very challenging transition for me to learn how to conduct myself as a professional.
Now, you just touched on it. You were brought up to the WWE, and within, not too long at all, you were in the main events fighting alongside Hulk Hogan, Vince McMahon. We've heard this a lot from some wrestlers that have experienced a fast rise to stardom. Do you think you received too much too soon?
Yeah, that's of course, that's exactly what it was. I was, you hit it. It was too much too soon for me to. I wasn't emotionally mature enough to accept that gift that was being handed to me, and that's the key. This was being handed to me. It wasn't something that I grinded out for 10, 12 years, trying to perfect my craft, and finally got this opportunity. Just like anything else, if something's handed to you, you don't appreciate it as much as if for example, you work all summer to save up to buy a car, and you fix the brakes and you change the oil and you get your license, and then it's like your car, it's your baby, and you can appreciate that car a lot more than a brand new car later on in life or something like that. But it was just a case of too much too soon.
Okay, and it's now 2014. 12 years have gone by since you debuted. Can you give us your highest point in professional wrestling, and then maybe one of your lows?
Sure. The highest point of professional wrestling is ongoing, and it's my tag team with Gregory Iron, who is who's the only wrestler in the world that has cerebral palsy. And he was inspired to become a professional wrestler when he saw me on WWE TV. And he said to himself, if Zach can do this, then I can do this too. And through very serendipitous moments, years later, we've combined forces, and we help each other out, and we spread a message of hope and inspiration, and it's completely our undertaking. And it's so amazing to be able to connect with these audiences as deep as we do. And I believe that together we're somehow the sum is greater than the parts. And it's totally amazing anytime I can step into a ring with him. He really brings out the best in me, and I hope that I can bring out the best too. So that's what's going. The probably a low point in my career is just doing these tours. I've been in recovery, and I've been sober for 4.5 years now. And towards the end of my addiction and my alcoholism, things got really bad with personally and professionally, and I would do these bullshit shows for these scumbag promoters, and they would pay me in drugs. And that how can I take any pride in me or my work when I'm going out there in the middle of nowhere America getting paid 20 pills or whatever it is. It's just so sad, and it makes me it makes me sad to think about it, but it also makes me incredibly grateful to see the progress and how far I've come, and I've been able to gain the trust of this industry back, and I've been able to gain my standing back within this industry, and I've been able to do some amazing things with Greg. That it kind of puts things into perspective, and it makes me grateful that there is an interest, like you said, even 12 years later. It's kind of been like a rebirth of sorts for me.
Okay. Now, I'm sure you know this, but there's currently another one-legged wrestler named Chris Melendez. Have you spoken with him? And also, how does it feel to know that you've inspired others to chase their dreams?
I love it, and I take absolutely no credit for Chris Melendez's success. This is a guy who had a dream before he lost his leg. And for those who don't know, he lost his leg overseas fighting for this country in an IED attack. And he still followed his dream of becoming a professional wrestler. And I think that story is just transcends all of wrestling. And I think it's a story that the public and the world can kind of grab onto. I've spoken with him. I don't know him. I've never met him face to face, but he seems like a really nice guy. And I think it's absolutely awesome that he's chosen this career. And again, I take absolutely no credit in his success. I wish him all the best, and that door is open. If that door is absolutely open, if he has any questions, comments, concerns, any advice, I can kind of pass along my experience down to him. I'd be more than happy to do it.
That's amazing. Now, you just mentioned the Handicap Heroes. You and Gregory Iron team up to take on pretty much any and every team out there today. I'm going to ask Gregory this later, but I'd like to find out from you, what would your dream tag team opponents be?
Well, I'll give you two. How about this? I would say our dream tag team opponents would be the Young Bucks at WrestleMania.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Yeah. That would be, because here's the thing, man. I obviously the Young Bucks are the best thing in professional wrestling right now, bar none. And they are and that's what every tag team in the world should be aspiring to be. They should aspire to create, to be at that level of success those guys have attained. And they're so inspirational to me because they've done that without the backing of WWE or TNA, right? They've done it strictly independent, and they've made themselves the hottest act in wrestling. And so it's to me, like they wrestle they wrestle the way that I enjoy watching. I enjoy watching that style of wrestling, and they do it the best. And so I would say, the Young Bucks for sure. And I said WrestleMania because that would be the biggest platform, and that would be the biggest paycheck too. So as a 31-year-old father, I'm always looking. I'm trying to save up for college here for my son. So, yeah, I would say the Young Bucks.
Lightning round.
You are an inspiration to many people. Who is your biggest inspiration?
My biggest inspiration, I'm going to give you 4 names, and those 4 names are Sabu, Rob Van Dam, and Jeff and Matt Hardy.
Awesome. When life hands you lemons, you...
When life hands you lemons, you throw those lemons right back at life.
Okay. Favorite wrestler of all time?
Sabu.
Who is the coolest Zach, other than yourself, of all time?
The coolest, Zach Morris.
Okay. And lastly, your favorite match that you were ever involved in?
Favorite match I was ever involved. I would say the wrestling the Big Show. That was huge for me. And there was a cool moment after that match where the crowd is just so behind me, and there's such a deep connection there where for the first time in my career, and again my career was probably a year at that point, a year's worth of matches, I felt that this could be something that I could do for a very long time because this is really good, but I want it to get better.
Lightning round.
Okay, and lastly, where can you be found on? Everybody's got social media and stuff today. Is there anything that you're excited you want to tell us about?
Yeah, I'm going to be all over the East Coast the next few months, man. That's what it really, like, a lot of, which is kind of neat for me because I've wrestled everywhere except for the East Coast. So,
Okay.
so for the next few months, I'm all up and down the East Coast, from Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, places like that. So all of it can be found at ZachGowen.com, and of course Twitter, Facebook, and all that stuff.
Okay. That's pretty much it for our interview today. We want to thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me again. Thanks for the interest.